1:53 p.m. The Eastern Mediterranean. Broad daylight. The sea is deep blue, the particular blue that exists only in the Mediterranean in late October. A color so saturated it looks almost artificial against the pale limestone coastline of Lebanon, visible 19 miles to the east. The sky is completely clear. Visibility is unlimited. And in that visibility, running southwest at 18 knots through international waters that the United States Sixth Fleet had patrolled continuously for 7 decades, USS Gerald R. Ford was conducting afternoon flight operations. She was the world's most advanced aircraft carrier. 100,000 tons, 125 aircraft, a crew of 5,000. Her electromagnetic aircraft launch systems had been cycling aircraft on and off her 4-acre flight deck since 0600 that morning without pause. F-35Cs, F/A-18E Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes, all of them supporting the U.S. Central Command air campaign over Syria and conducting the routine presence operations that USS Gerald R. Ford had been executing in the Eastern Mediterranean for 61 consecutive days. She was visible from the Lebanese coast on a clear day. She had been visible from the Lebanese coast intermittently for 61 days, and in a hardened tunnel complex drilled into the limestone of the Bekaa Valley, 43 miles east of Beirut. The Hezbollah precision weapons unit that answered directly to the IRGC Quds force had been tracking her for 54 of those days. The operation that the IRGC had designed and that the Hezbollah precision weapons unit had been preparing to execute was the most technically ambitious attack ever attempted by any Iranian proxy force against any U.S. military asset. Its weapons were not improvised. They were not crude. They were the precise products of Iranian aerospace engineering, smuggled into Lebanon through a network of IRGC logistics channels that had been running covertly for 4 years, pre-positioned in hardened underground facilities that had been constructed specifically for this mission, and operated by Hezbollah personnel who had received 18 months of technical training at IRGC facilities in Iran. The attack package consisted of 3 coordinated elements. First, 14 Fateh 313 short-range ballistic missiles, the same GPS and optically guided system that Iran had used operationally against the targets in Iraq and Syria, pre-positioned in 4 hardened launch complexes in the Bekaa Valley, programmed to strike USS Gerald R. Ford's flight deck and island structure in a compressed salvo designed to arrive within a 30-second window. Second, 31 Shad 238 jet-powered loitering munitions, the upgraded turbojet variant carrying 40-kilogram warheads launched from dispersed sites across southern Lebanon in 3 successive waves, timed to arrive over the carrier at 7-minute intervals and sustain the attack after the ballistic salvo. Third, 9 Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles, a weapon Iran had previously used only against surface targets in the Persian Gulf, pre-positioned in a 5th hardened complex in the southern Bekaa and programmed to strike the carrier's hull at the waterline, below the flight deck armor, targeting the engineering spaces. 54 weapons from Lebanese soil against an American carrier in international waters, in broad daylight. In Tehran, the IRGC commander who had designed the operation had calculated that this attack would succeed where previous proxy strikes had failed. The Eastern Mediterranean was not the Red Sea. The Sixth Fleet's air defense architecture in the Mediterranean was configured for the threat environment of that theater. Primarily air-breathing threats from state actors, not the specific combination of ballistic missiles and swarming drones that the IRGC had been developing for Gulf operations. The Patriot batteries that defended U.S. forces in the Gulf were not present in the Mediterranean in the numbers that the Gulf required. And USS Gerald R. Fars, Ford's own Aegis consort vessels, USS Lady Gulf and USS Ramage, were positioned in their standard escort stations that had been optimized for air defense against Syrian and Russian air forces, not for ballistic missile defense from the Lebanese coast 19 miles away. He had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. First mistake: the Fateh 313 launch complexes in the Buqayya Valley had been identified 7 weeks earlier. A classified U.S. intelligence collection operation, combining signals intelligence from NSA collection against IRGC Quds Force logistics communications, satellite imagery analysis from a National Reconnaissance Office asset tasked to the Lebanon target set, and human intelligence reporting from a CIA source with access to the IRGC procurement network, had reconstructed the operational concept of the carrier strike with sufficient fidelity to identify the general location of the launch infrastructure. By week 3 of USS Gerald R. Ford's deployment. By week 6, specific coordinates of 3 of the 4 Fateh 313 launch complexes had been identified and confirmed. All 3 were in the 6th Fleet targeting database, pre-assigned to Tomahawk missiles in USS Lady Gulf's VLS cells, with firing solutions current to the hour. Second mistake: the Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles had been detected through an emissions intelligence operation that the IRGC had no awareness of. The Khalij Fars requires a seeker activation test, a brief but detectable electromagnetic emission from the terminal guidance seeker head. During the final pre-launch checkout sequence, intelligence analysts at the National Security Agency had been specifically tasked to monitor Lebanese territory for this emission signature. Following a DIA assessment that IRGC-supplied anti-ship ballistic missiles had been transferred to Hezbollah custody in a logistics shipment identified 14 months earlier. When the Khalij Fars seekers were activated during their final pre-launch test at 11:44 a.m., 94 minutes before the attack, the emission signature was detected, classified, and transmitted to USS Gerald R. Ford's Combat Information Center at 11:51 a.m. 94 minutes. The strike group commander had 94 minutes from the moment the Khalij Fars seekers activated to the moment the first weapon fired. He used every one of them. Third mistake: the Shahed 238 launch sites had been pre-struck 4 hours before the attack. The 31 launch positions in southern Lebanon had been identified through a combination of satellite imagery and human intelligence over a 6-week period. When the 94-minute warning arrived at 11:51 a.m., the 6th Fleet commander authorized an immediate preemptive strike against every identified launch position. 4 B-1B Lancer bombers that had been operating over the eastern Mediterranean in a classified alert orbit since 8 a.m. received their strike tasking at 11:56 a.m. Each carried 24 GBU-31 JDAM precision-guided bombs. In a coordinated strike that began at 12:09 p.m. and concluded at 12:31 p.m., 96 JDAMs impacted 31 Shahed 238 launch positions across southern Lebanon. 24 of the 31 positions were struck directly. Their launch vehicles and pre-positioned munitions rendered inoperable before a single drone could be armed or launched. 7 positions were not directly struck, but sustained sufficient blast damage from adjacent impacts to render their launch equipment inoperable. Of the 31 planned Shahed 238 launches, 0 occurred. Not one drone left the ground. Fourth mistake: the IRGC had not accounted for the USS Arleigh Burke that had been quietly repositioned to a ballistic missile defense station 19 days earlier. Following the initial intelligence indicators of the Bekaa Valley launch infrastructure, U.S. 6th Fleet had requested and received the transfer of USS Cole, one of the Navy's baseline 9 Aegis destroyers with certified ballistic missile defense capability, from the 5th Fleet area of operations to a classified holding station in the eastern Mediterranean. USS Cole had been operating under strict emissions control, positioned 44 miles west of USS Gerald R. Ford on a line of bearing that provided optimal midcourse intercept geometry against ballistic missiles launched from the Bekaa Valley. She was not on any published 6th Fleet order of battle. She was not broadcasting on AIS. Iranian intelligence tracking of U.S. naval assets in the Mediterranean had not detected her repositioning. The attack package had been sized to defeat 2 Aegis consort vessels. It was about to be engaged by 3. Fifth mistake. The 5th Fateh 313 launch complex, the one that had not been identified and was not in the targeting database, revealed itself the moment it activated its pre-launch radar for terminal guidance update. At 1:47 p.m., 6 minutes before the first missile fired, the launch complex's terminal guidance update radar activated on a frequency that USS Late Gulf's electronic warfare suite had been specifically programmed to detect following the 94-minute warning. The emission was acquired, classified, and located by USS Late Gulf's AN/SLQ-32 system in 40 seconds. The coordinates were transmitted to the targeting cell aboard USS Gerald R. Ford, where a targeting officer computed a Tomahawk firing solution in 90 seconds and had it preloaded into USS Lady Gulf's fire control system 2 minutes before the first Fateh 313 launched. When the strike authorization was given at 1:53 p.m., the same second the first missile fired, USS Late Gulf already had a current firing solution on all 5 launch complexes, not 4. Sixth mistake. The Hezbollah Precision Weapons Unit's underground command post in the Bekaa Valley, from which the entire operation was being directed in real time, had been located. The signals intelligence collection that had been running against IRGC Quds Force communications in Lebanon had identified the specific communications node through which the attack coordination traffic was flowing. Direction finding analysis over a 3-week period had progressively narrowed the node's location to a 500-meter radius in the central Bekaa Valley. 12 hours before the attack, the precision was sufficient for targeting. The command post's coordinates had been loaded into a Tomahawk in USS Lady Gulf's cell number 14 since 1:47 a.m. that morning. Waiting. What happened in the next 29 minutes rendered 54 weapons harmless, eliminated 5 launch complexes, and dismantled the most sophisticated Iranian proxy strike capability ever assembled outside Iranian territory. At 1:53 p.m., the execute signal reached the Hezbollah launch teams in the Bekaa Valley. 14 Fateh 313 motors ignited across 5 launch complexes within a 40-second window. The SBIRS satellite network registered all 14 launches within 6 seconds. The alert reached USS Gerald R. Ford's CIC and all 3 Aegis consort vessels simultaneously at 1:53 p.m. and 41 seconds. The engagement sequences that had been pre-computed and waiting for exactly this moment began executing before any of the Fateh 313 missiles had completed their initial boost phase. USS Cole fired first. Her SM-3 Block A-B interceptors, the midcourse engagement weapon whose intercept altitude and range was optimal for the Fateh 313's compressed trajectory profile from the Lebanese coast, launched in a rapid sequence beginning at 1:54 p.m. in 12 seconds. 7 SM-3 interceptors, each assigned a specific Fateh 313 track from the pre-computed engagement solution, rose from her VLS cells and accelerated to intercept altitude. At the engagement ranges involved, the Bekaa Valley is 43 miles from the Lebanese coast, and the carrier was 19 miles offshore. The Fateh 313's flight time was under 3 minutes. The SM-3 intercepts were occurring at altitude, while the missiles were still over Lebanese territory. 5 clean neutralizations. 2 re-entry vehicles survived the first intercept attempt and continued toward the terminal phase. USS Late Gulf engaged both with SM-2 extended range missiles in a terminal layer intercept. Both were neutralized at 11 kilometers altitude above the eastern Mediterranean. Their debris fell into the sea 23 miles from the carrier, USS Ramage and USS Gerald R. Ford's own evolved Sea Sparrow missiles engaged the 5 Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles simultaneously. The Khalij Fars uses a terminal guidance seeker and attitude control jets to adjust trajectory against a moving target, specifically designed to defeat point defense systems. USS Ramage's Aegis fire control had been updated with a software patch addressing the Khalij Fars terminal maneuver profile 2 weeks earlier. The updated algorithm tracked it through its maneuvers with precision the original version could not have achieved. 4 of 5 Khalij Fars missiles were neutralized by SM-2ER in the terminal layer. 1 survived and was engaged by USS Gerald R. Ford's ESSM at 4 kilometers, close enough that its debris was visible from the carrier's port sponson. 14 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles. 14 neutralized. 5 Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles. 5 neutralized. 0 drone launches, 31 Shahad-2. 38 launch positions rendered inoperable by the B-1B pre-strike 4 hours earlier. 54 planned weapons. 0 impacts on USS Gerald R. Ford, or any vessel in the strike group. Now the strike group answered in full. USS Leyte Gulf fired her prepared Tomahawk salvo at 1:53 p.m. The same second the first Fateh 313 launched, the pre-authorization having been transmitted to her commanding officer at 1:51 p.m. when the SBIRS pre-launch thermal indicators showed imminent ignition. 38 Tomahawks, 5 targeting the 4 identified Fateh 313 launch complexes. 7 missiles split across 4 sites, with the 5th complex receiving 6 missiles using the firing solution computed 11 minutes earlier from the terminal guidance radar emission. The remaining 12 Tomahawks targeted the Hezbollah command post in the central Bekaa Valley. Cell number 14 and 11 additional cells, all assigned to the same coordinate set. A comprehensive strike designed to ensure that the command post's underground hardening did not protect it from the combined effect of multiple direct penetrating warhead impacts. The 5 Fateh 313 launch complexes were struck between 2:04 p.m. and 2:09 p.m. Post-strike assessment, conducted by the National Reconnaissance Office satellite that had been tasked to continuous coverage of the Bekaa Valley throughout the engagement, confirmed direct impacts on the launch infrastructure at all 5 sites. The hardened underground launch facilities, whose construction had required 4 years and represented the most significant IRGC investment in proxy offensive capability outside Iranian territory, were rendered inoperable at all 5 locations. Secondary detonations from residual propellant in the launcher magazines burned at 3 sites for over 90 minutes. The Hezbollah command post received 12 Tomahawk impacts between 2:06 p.m. and 2:14 p.m. The final missile timed to detonate after initial warheads created structural breaches. The command post was rendered comprehensively inoperable. Post-strike signals intelligence confirmed the IRGC coordination traffic ceased all emissions at 2:07 p.m. At 2:01 p.m., 8 minutes after the first Fateh 313 launched, USS Gerald R. Ford's strike package cleared the deck. 16 aircraft airborne in 12 minutes. 8 FA-18E, Super Hornets, 4 F-35C, Lightning IIs, 4 EA-18G Growlers, maintaining the electronic warfare architecture over the Lebanese coast. Their targets were the IRGC Quds Force Logistics Network infrastructure in Lebanon, the supply depots, the transport vehicle parks, and the communications relay stations through which the 4-year buildup of the Bekaa Valley strike capability had been sustained and through which any reconstitution effort would have to flow. The EA-18G Growlers activated at 2:14 p.m., flooding the Lebanese air defense network, such as it was, with broadband jamming that degraded any attempt at coherent radar tracking of the inbound strike packages. The F-35Cs led the strike into Lebanese airspace at low altitude, their radar cross-sections below the detection threshold of any sensor in the operational area. Their targets were 3 IRGC Quds Force logistics warehouses in the Bekaa Valley that had been identified as the primary storage nodes for the precision weapons transferred from Iran to Hezbollah over the preceding 4 years. 8 JASSM-ER missiles, released from outside Lebanese territory, impacted all 3 warehouses between 2:27 p.m. and 2:31 p.m. The warehouses, holding the inventory of Iranian-supplied precision weapons that represented the IRGC's investment in Lebanon-based standoff capability, were rendered inoperable. The secondary detonations from stored munitions at 2 of the 3 sites were the largest explosive events in the Bekaa Valley since the Lebanese Civil War. The FA-18E Super Hornets struck 3 IRGC transport vehicle parks identified from satellite imagery, receiving GBU-31 JDAM strikes between 2:29 p.m. and 2:36 p.m. 47 transport vehicles were rendered inoperable on the hard stand, eliminating the physical means to reconstitute any future Bekaa Valley strike capability. At 2:22 p.m., USS Cole fired a second Tomahawk salvo of 14 missiles against the IRGC Quds Force Coordination Facility at Baalbek, the node through which the 4-year Lebanese precision weapons buildup had been managed. 8 direct impacts rendered the administrative building, communications infrastructure, vehicle park, and operational records archive inoperable. The full accounting, compiled by USS Gerald R. Ford's Strike Group Commander, and transmitted to 6th Fleet and European Command by 4 p.m. 54 weapons planned against USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group. 31 Shahed 238 drones. 0 launched. All 31 launch positions rendered inoperable by B-1B pre-strike. 14 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles. All 14 neutralized. 0 impacts. 5 Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles. All 5 neutralized. 0 impacts. Total weapons that reached USS Gerald R. Ford, 0. USS Gerald R. Ford, undamaged. Flight operations continuous throughout the engagement. USS Leyte Gulf, undamaged. USS Cole, undamaged. USS Ramage, undamaged. U.S. personnel who sustained fatal outcomes, 0. In retaliation, 5 Fateh 313 launch complexes in the Bekaa Valley rendered inoperable with secondary detonations. Hezbollah Precision Weapons Unit Command Post rendered inoperable. 3 IRGC logistics warehouses in the Bekaa Valley rendered inoperable with major secondary detonations from stored munitions. 3 IRGC transport vehicle parks incapacitated. 47 vehicles rendered inoperable. IRGC Quds Force Coordination Facility at Baalbek rendered inoperable. IRGC Quds Force and Hezbollah Precision Weapons Unit personnel who sustained fatal outcomes across all strike packages. 193 at 3:47 p.m. USS Gerald R. Ford completed her scheduled afternoon flight operations and launched her first evening combat air patrol. The aircraft cycled off the deck in the same sequence they had cycled every evening for 61 days. The eastern Mediterranean sky was still completely clear. Visibility was still unlimited. And the carrier that had been the target of the most sophisticated Iranian proxy attack ever attempted outside Iranian territory was continuing her assigned mission as if the engagement that had occurred 2 hours earlier had been a scheduled evolution rather than an existential threat. In the Bekaa Valley, the secondary detonations from the IRGC logistics warehouses were still burning. The smoke columns rose into the clear October sky and drifted west toward the Lebanese coast, visible from the carrier's bridge in the afternoon light. In Tehran, the IRGC Quds Force commander reviewed a battle damage assessment that documented 4 years and $800 million of Lebanese strike capability, dismantled in 29 minutes of defensive engagement and 90 minutes of follow-on strikes. The carrier was still there, still cycling aircraft. The Eastern Mediterranean was still free water. This is what happens when you direct a proxy force to strike a United States carrier strike group from the territory of a neighboring state. You do not achieve surprise. You find that your launch complex terminal guidance radar was detected 94 minutes before your first missile fired, and that a targeting solution was already loaded before your weapon left the ground. You find that the drone force you spent 6 weeks positioning was struck by B-1B Lancers 4 hours before your operation began, reducing your 31 planned launches to 0. You find that a third Aegis destroyer had been repositioned to the Mediterranean specifically to engage your ballistic missiles from the optimal midcourse intercept station, a destroyer your intelligence did not know was there. You find that the command post from which you directed the operation was struck by 12 Tomahawks before the last of your missiles had been intercepted. You assemble $800 million of Iranian-supplied precision weapons capability over 4 years. You launch 54 weapons. 0 reach the carrier. And by the time your last missile has been neutralized, every piece of infrastructure that assembled, stored, transported, and launched those weapons is inoperable wreckage burning in the Bekaa Valley. USS Gerald R. Ford completed her 62nd consecutive day of Eastern Mediterranean flight operations without interruption. The next morning, she launched her first sorties at 600. As she had every morning for 62 days, the Mediterranean is free. It will remain free. And the 4 years and $800 million that Iran invested in changing that fact are smoke over the Bekaa Valley.